Good evening, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. So nice to see everybody who is here and to know that we have you on live stream, and it's wonderful to be seen, to see and to be seen. For a long time it was just nice to be seen, but it's so great to have so many of you in person here. I don't know whether you saw and read a very suggestive op-ed piece in this morning's New York Times. The author was Margaret Renkel. And the title of this piece, and quite provocative, "It's Possible to Learn from Flawed People." And along the way, she reminisces about something that happened to her in her youth when she came across a quote by Sir Thomas More, who, as many of you may know, was the Lord High Chancellor of Great Britain during the time of Henry VIII, would not go along with his move to a kind of Protestant Reformation of his own, and was accused of treason and hung. But Renkel says that the words that she came across as a youth, she says, these are words that burned into me, and I can see why. Let me quote them. "When a man takes an oath, he holds his own self in his hands like water. And if he opens his fingers, then he needn't hope to find himself again." The idea of integrity. When a person takes an oath, he is tantamount to holding yourself in your hands like water. And if we compromise that integrity, if we open our fingers and the water runs out, we needn't hope to find ourselves again. And I've been thinking about this issue of integrity, as I'm sure we all have been over the past many months and years. What is integrity? It's the combination of conduct and character, what we do and who we are, of action and virtue, the acts that we do, and the kind of virtues, honesty, humility, magnanimity, courage, whether we live a life of commitment to those virtues, which create the solidity of our character. And when I think about the issue of integrity, I think about one of the great Psalms in the Bible, Psalm 15. And I want to read it to you. And while I'm reading it, think about what aspects of the psalmist's view reflect action and what reflect character. And I'm sure that, though this is a short psalm, many of its proposals are controversial, worthy of discussion. "O Lord, who may sojourn in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy mountain? The one who lives without blame, who does what is right, and in his heart acknowledges the truth, whose tongue is not given to evil, who has never done harm to his fellow or borne reproach for his acts toward his neighbor, for whom a contemptible man is to be avoided, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who stands by his oath, even to his own hurt, who has never lent money at interest, or accepted a bribe against the innocent. And then the psalmist summarizes what all this adds up to. The person who acts in this way shall never be shaken. Now, certainly the psalmist knows something about life and knows that a plain meaning of this summary is certainly false. A life of virtue does not guarantee that we will not be shaken, that we will not be tossed by the fortunes, the ill winds of bad fortune. What then might the psalmist mean by this? Perhaps when we live a life of integrity, a life of solid and settled virtues, that we have a sense of well-being that is generated from our own actions and our own sense of things. And though the winds of ill fortune may strike us, nevertheless, we can have a sense of security in the fact that we have lived a good life. And in this sense, we can never be shaken. Let's turn now to page 26 in our prayer books, and I ask you please to rise for the Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
ויאמר תברך חירותי וימליך מלכותי.
בחיי חון וביומי חון וחיי דכל בית ישראל.
בעגלה, בעגלה, ובזמן קריב, ואמרו
Amen.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם עולם ועולמיה, יתברך. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה, שמי דקודשה בריחו להילה, מן כל מלאכתה ושירתה.
תושבחתה ונחמתה, דהמירן ביעלמה.
ואמרו
אמן.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך, ברוך אדוני המבורך, לעולם ועד.
We continue together at the top of page 33. As you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shem Let's read together on page 34. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever. You may be seated. We continue to chant the Via Hafta together on page 36.
את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם המזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם
מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים.
אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
If you're like me, when you read the first line of the translation of the V'ahavta, you ask yourselves, how should I love the Lord? That's what this passage suggests to us, that we love God. And my suggestion is that the sentences that follow tell us how. Let's read it together. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Thus you shall remember to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. Adonai Elohechem Emet. At the top of page 39, let's continue to read together. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there, except by joining hands, marching together.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש. נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע הים לפני משה. זה עניינו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך, אדוני ימלוך, לעולם ועד.
Page 43. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukkot shalom aleinu, va'al kol amo Yisrael, va'al Yerushalayim.
ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. ישמחו במלכותך, שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת. מקדשי שביעי שבת כולם ישמחו במלכותך שומרי 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 שבת וקוראי עונג שבת.
We turn now to page 46, and as you are able, I invite you to rise for the Amidah.
Adonai, simpatai tiftachu fi agid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu ve'imotenu. Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'koneh Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה, רב להושיח, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מחכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדום מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל.
We continue now at the middle of page 53 with a fragment from a poem by Yehuda Halevi, arguably the greatest Hebrew poet since the biblical Psalms, who was also a philosopher whose philosophy often generated a kind of anti-philosophy feeling. Let's read this together. Where might I go to find you, exalted, hidden one? Yet where would I not go to find you, ever-present, eternal one? My heart cries out to you, please draw near to me. The moment I reach out for you, I find you reaching in for me. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh. You may be seated. And we continue on page 61, and let's continue reading together. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of every land. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Praised are you, eternal one, who blesses our people with peace. Baruch atah Adonai hamvarech et amo Yisrael bashalom.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim ובכל שעה בשלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
We have moments now for silent prayer.
עושי שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל.
Well, Shabbat Shalom again to everyone. How nice to see you here. How nice to be able to celebrate Shabbat together, to welcome this very special moment together here in this beautiful chapel. And how wonderful to also know that you are home. We turn to Seder Kriyat Torah, and I now invite you to turn to page 244. There is none like you among the gods, Adonai, and there are no deeds like yours. You are sovereign over all worlds, and your dominion is in all generations. Adonai reigns, Adonai has reigned, Adonai will reign forever and ever. Adonai will give strength to our people. Adonai will bless our people with peace. Please rise.
אין כמוך באלוהים אדוני, ואין כמעשיך. מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני עוז לימו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. הרחמים היטיבו ברצונך את ציון, תבנה חומות ירושלים, תבנה חומות ירושלים. כי בך לבד בטחנו, מלך אלוהים ונישא, אדון עולמים.
In this scroll is the secret of our people's life from Sinai until now. Its teaching is love and justice, goodness and hope. Freedom is its gift to all who hold fast to it.
כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני בירושלים. ברוך שנתן תורה, תורה, ברוך שנתן תורה, תורה, לעמו ישראל, והיא קדושתו. שמע ישראל
You may be seated. It is a special pleasure to be able to join together on this Shabbat right after Purim, in between Purim and Passover, this period of Purim to Passover, which is so formative for us, and to be able to, for a moment, disconnect in certain ways from the world and reconnect in other ways to the world, and think about the roots, the anchors, the very core of our faith. And it is a little bit strange to do that today. And I'd like to explain for a moment why. You know, the period between Purim and Passover, the period wherein we find ourselves, is a period that is in many ways equivalent to the last couple of weeks of the Jewish year and the period of the Jewish New Year and Yom Kippur. This moment in time, the beginning of the month of Adar, which we're going to be celebrating in just a couple of weeks, the beginning of the month of Nisan, the beginning of that month of Passover, that beginning of the month was the Jewish New Year. It used to be the Jewish New Year. Now we celebrate the Jewish New Year with Rosh Hashanah. And after Rosh Hashanah comes, Yom Kippur, 10 days after, and Sukkot a few days later into the middle of the month. What we have here is now Passover in the middle of the month of Nisan. And so the last weeks of the Jewish year and the last weeks of Adar and the beginning of Nisan are parallel periods. And they're parallel periods in very interesting ways. In certain ways, we have two Jewish New Years. And in the context of these Jewish New Years, the Jewish New Year that we celebrate in Tishrei, in the fall, right? The New Year and Yom Kippur are times of deep personal introspection. Remember Yom Kippur and the liturgy, who will live and who will die, who by water, who by fire, right? A very deep personal introspection. It's about us and how we live our lives and how we shall continue to live our lives and how it is that we ought to grow and what it is that we do for ourselves during this period. Whereas the time of Purim and Passover, this time in between Purim and Passover, is a little bit different. It's a time that addresses our collective identity. Purim is about the survival of the Jewish nation, the survival of Judaism, of everybody. And Passover is about the exodus of the entire Jewish nation from Egypt. It's not so personal, it's collective, right? Whereas Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are deeply personal, Purim and Passover are more collective. They're about our collective identities, right? And so this is a time wherein, now between Purim and Passover, we turn to the world, we look at the world, we look at our society, we look at what is happening in the Ukraine, we look at what is happening in our country, we look at what is happening in our greater community, and we ask ourselves, are we on the right track? Is this right? And if not, where do we go from here? And we don't just look at our country, we don't just look at the world, we don't just look at our greater community, we look at everything. We look at our temple community, we look at our immediate community, and ask ourselves the same questions. How are we doing? Are we on the right track? And if not, what does this mean? Can we change? What would change look like? How do we change? How is it that change comes about? Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, personal change. Purim and Passover, collective change. Change we engage in together. Which, think for a moment about the world we inhabit. Think for a moment about what's happening in our greater community? Each person here, think about what is happening in our world right now and in our greater community. And guess where this immediately leads us? How do we as Jews process this? How do we move forward? Where does this lead us? Where does this take us? Of course, as I'm sure you're all guessing, to the subject of temple sacrifices. Temple sacrifices. Temple sacrifices. The Torah portion of Tzav that we read today, that we read every single year right after the Purim story, lists and explains all the temple sacrifices. At this point, we find ourselves in the Torah, in the book of Vayikra, the second Torah portion of the book of Vayikra, right at a time wherein the children of Israel are still at the foot of Mount Sinai. They haven't traveled yet, and this here contains the laws, the summary of the laws relating to all of the sacrifices. What do the sacrifices have to do with our world? What do we do here by way of evaluating our world and our greater community in connection with these sacrifices? What on earth were they thinking putting this right here, right now? Maimonides, in his Guide to the Perplexed, has a response to this. In Book 3, Chapter 32, one of the most extraordinary moments of the Guide to the Perplexed, Maimonides makes a remarkable suggestion. And the suggestion is that the world that surrounds us and that we as human beings are people who can only change incrementally. Maimonides, remember, is a doctor. He's a physician. He's a scientist. He looks at the natural world and he says, look at the natural world around you. Look at the growth of your own muscles, nerve cells, sinews and tendons. It's all gradual. Look at the way our digestive system develops. It's all gradual. Look at the natural world around us. Everything around us is gradual. Change in human beings can only come gradually. And Maimonides makes in this chapter a remarkable statement about this Torah portion and the sacrifices in the Torah portion. He says the sacrifices were not intended in and for themselves, but rather as instruments of human change. As us, as a society, us as a community, seeking to change ourselves for the better. Why sacrifices? Maimonides explains, at the time of the sacrifices, everybody in the world, in the ancient world, everybody engaged in offering sacrifices to idols. The change away from sacrifices would have been far too radical. The Israelites wouldn't have been able to handle it. And so the Torah commanded that we engage in sacrifices, but only for God, and only in the way the Torah demands these sacrifices be conducted. So that we slowly and incrementally change, the sacrifices become the instruments of our change for the sake of establishing the kingdom of God here on earth. The Haftorah for this Torah portion comes out of the book of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah goes further. Here are the words of Jeremiah. כה אמר אדוני צבאות אלוהי ישראל, עולותיכם ספו על זבחיכם ואכלו בשר. Here is what God said, the God of Israel, the Lord of hosts. Your sacrifices, you might as well eat them. Eat the meat and finish it, for I, God, have no use for them. לא דיברתי את אבותיכם ולא ציוויתים ביום הוציאי אותם מארץ מצרים על דברי עולה וזבח. I did not command the Israelites at the time of the Exodus about the sacrifices. כי אם את הדבר הזה ציוויתי אותם לאמור, rather I commanded them this, שמעו וקולי, hear my voice, והייתי לכם לאלוהים, and I shall be your God, ואתם תהיו לי לעם, you shall be for me my nation, והלכתם בכל הדרך אשר אצווה אתכם, and follow my commandments, למען ייטב lachem, for the sake of good. In other words, Jeremiah says, it's not about the sacrifices. God never commanded the sacrifices at the time of the Exodus. What God really commanded was for us to do good. Jeremiah says to the people of Israel, look at the world around you. Look at your greater community. Look at your sacrifices and look at the altars that you are building for your sacrifices. Let us look at our own rituals, he says, and see what they amount to. The conclusion of this Haftorah occurs in chapter 9 of the book of Jeremiah, and I will take one moment to finish this up here in Jeremiah. כה אמר אדוני, אל יתהלל חכם בחוכמתו. Thus said God, let the wise not seek to glorify him or herself in their wisdom. אל יתהלל הגיבור בגבורתו, let the courageous not seek to glorify him or herself in their courage. אל יתהלל עשיר בעושרו, let not the wealthy seek to glorify themselves in his or her wealth. כי אם בזאת יתהלל המתהלל, השכל וידוע אותי. Rather, seek glory in knowing me, כי אני אדוני, עושה חסד משפט וצדקה בארץ. For I am God, creator of loving kindness, judgment, and justice in the land. Ki ve'ele chafatzti, for this I seek. So much for the sacrifices in the Torah portion of Tzav. Now, this is a remarkable moment in our Hebrew Bible, and I would suggest to you the birth of Reform Judaism. Of a Judaism that is not focused on rituals, that is not focused on the specific rules of how to do this and when to do that, and precisely how to build the altar and what kind of sacrifice to offer at this time as opposed to that time, and whether it should be fully burnt or not fully burnt, and what we may eat and what we may not eat. But the Judaism that focuses on loving kindness, on true judgment, and on justice, on the image of God, and that recognizes that it wasn't the sacrifices that God actually commanded us. Now, why are we reading this here and now? The holiday of Purim, my friends, is about incremental change. It is about change within the government of Persia. It is about change that occurs within the structures of recognized politics. in the context of lobbying. Queen Esther lobbies Achashverosh. How do we do this? We organize. Mordechai organizes the masses. What do? We get them to write letters to their representatives. We get them to write op-eds. What then do? We send a lobbyist to the government. What do we do with elected officials? We wine them and dine them. And whom do we send to speak to the king? Whom do we send to speak to our elected representatives? Very attractive and well-spoken people who might sway them, who might change their minds. That was what was going on in Persia at the time. I know, unimaginable, hardly believable. Incremental change, the work of politics, politicking from within government, changing the situation from within government, working within institutions. Whereas Passover represents radical change. No longer a change within government, no longer a change through lobbying, but rather a change that means a complete exit. The destruction of the old order in order to try to establish a new order. A leaving something behind for something new. That is what the Exodus is about. Incremental change, as in Maimonides in Purim, whereas radical change, very much along the lines of the view of Jeremiah, this is not what I want, says God. Leave it aside. Look around you. We need to think differently. Passover. And so we read these texts between Purim and Passover. This Shabbat, I have a special invitation for you. And my invitation for you is to evaluate the world around you. Evaluate your greater community. Think about where we stand. Think about our environment. Think about our human environment. Think about our relationships. Think about our institutions. And accept the call of our texts to think about what needs to change and how we might go about that change. Are we going to continue pushing for slow, gradual, incremental change? Are we going to accept the systems that we have, the institutions that we have as they are? Or are there elements of our system that we ought to perhaps leave behind and exit? Where do we stand at this time between Purim and Passover? Where do we stand at the time of this change of seasons? And where are we leading? What kind of world will we leave to our children and grandchildren, to the next generations? Let us hear the words of the prophet, and let us seek to leave for our children and grandchildren a world of chesed, a world of loving kindness, a world of mishpat, of true judgment, and a world of tzedakah, a world of justice, especially at this time. May this be God's will, and may this be our will. And let us together say, Amen. And now, as we prepare to read a very short snippet of Parashat Tzav, let us please rise and bless the Torah together. Baruchu et Adonai Hamvorach, Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam vaed. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam vaed. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, venatan lanu. Baruch ata Adonai. Amen. You may be seated. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, צב את אהרון ואת בניו לאמור, and God spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his sons, saying, Zot Torat ha'olah, this is the Torah, this is the instruction of the rising offering, hi ha'olah al mokdah al hamizbeach, כל הלילה עד הבוקר ואש המזבח תוקד בו. This is the rising sacrifice on the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall burn in it. And I read these words because 7 times in this Torah portion, the formula of Zot HaTorah, this is the Torah of the particular sacrifice, this formula is repeated. Zot Torat ha'olah, here, a little bit later, 5 verses later, Zot Torat hamincha, and then later, Zot Torat hechatat, following that, Zot Torat he'asham. Every single time, this is the Torah. I read this to you here for you to understand how audacious Jeremiah was in knowing this text and saying, no, this is not what God commanded us. Let us again bless the Torah. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet, v'chayei olam nata betochenu. Baruch ata Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. With the Torah in our midst, our minds now turn to those who are in need of healing, who are in need of a special blessing of support and of strength. At this time, before I invite you to mention the names of those who are on your minds and in your hearts, and the same for you at home, let me share the names that you have shared with us. Carol Fleeter, Nancy Friedman, Amelia Hegarty, Mattie Jefferson, Byron Krantz, Dr. Anna Meyrovich, Richard Moore, and Bob Shippey. If there are others whom you are thinking of at this time, please add these names that you are thinking of to those that I just mentioned, that we may pray for their well-being together.
Judy Jacobson.
At this time, let us turn to page 253 and join together in the Mishabeach. And now to celebrate the word of Torah, the word of God in our midst, I invite you to please rise.
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל. אני אדוני בניית משה. יללי ללי ללי ללי
Turning to page 256, Yehalelu et Shem Adonai ki nisgav shemo levado. Let us praise the name of Adonai, for God's name alone is exalted. Ki lekach tov natati lachem, for I have given you good instruction, do not abandon my Torah. It is a tree of life for those who hold fast to it, and all its supporters are happy. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. Return us to you, Adonai, and we will return. Renew our days as of old. And as we remain standing, please turn to page 282 for the Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח להדור הכל, לתת גדולה ילוצה בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה
You may be seated. At this time, our minds, our hearts turn to those whom we have lost, to those who have shaped our lives, to those upon whose shoulders we stand. At this time, we think of those chains that have bound us to our heritage, to our values, to our anchors, of those people who have represented the links in those chains. At this time, we think especially of those who were laid to rest, or those whom we have lost within this last week. Jack Harold Davidson, Karen Feinberg, Marjorie Lyon Grodin, and Terry Levy. And we take into our hearts those who were laid to rest within this last 30 days, those for whom we are within the Shloshim period. Miriam Mimi Arnstein, Louis Reuterblatt, Gladys R. Strauss, Betty Abramovitz, Tiffany Bossin, Ryan Gallagher, Carmela Schneider, Megan Thompson, Simone Gross, and Zelda Saltzman. And we remember with love those whose yahrzeits occur at this time. Lois Wendy Abrams, Celia Auerbach, William M. Bassicus, Sarah Baumel, Lester Bensev, Rose Bernstein, Meyer Blomberg, Betty B. Karan, Faye Beigelson Kornfeld, Stanford Diamond, Edward Englander, William E. Fertel, Mary Newhouse Firth, William B. Fish, Meyer H. Forsch, Frank H. Fox, Mina Kleeman Friedberg, Barry J. Friedman, Louis Friedman, Emily Goldsmith, Jenny Goldsmith, Norman Harris, Rebecca Heller, Gertrude Loveman Jaskulek, Harry Louis Jones, Thomas Jordan, Marvin A. Kane, Ida Kraselsky, Maxwell L. Lapin, Max Lefkowitz, Dr. Harry Lyons, Manny Marchand, Blanche M. Mayer, Lena Mendelssohn, Mary Galvin Miller, Louis Newman, Samuel R. Pressman, Penny Ganger Robins, Samuel S. Rosenthal, Samuel A. Roth, Ruth Rothstein, Don L. Rubenfield, Henry Sadugor, Howard Simon Sachs, Dorothy Savransky, Harry Shermer, Jerome Schleifer, Louis Schoen, Bernice G. Schwartz, Dr. Edward D. Schwartz, Nathan Seidman, Erwin Siegel, Rose Pollock Spear, Leon Sterling, Rose Spilka, Harold M. Strauss, Sophie Klopfer Strauss, Max Swerdlow, David Tomarkin, Samuel S. Weber, Ruth B. Weiss, Sidney N. Weitz, Armin H. Wolgemuth, and Monroe M. Worth. If there are other people whom you are mourning at this time whose names have not just been read off this list, or if I mispronounced any of the names on the list, I invite you and, of course, you at home to please utter these names now that we may recite the Kaddish in their honor together. If at this time you are within the Shiva period, if you have lost a loved one or buried a loved one within the last 7 days, I invite you at this time to please rise. If at this time you are within the Shloshim period, if you have lost or buried a loved one within the last 30 days, I invite you now to please rise. If you are marking a yahrzeit at this time, I invite you now to please rise. And now, as a caring congregation, let us all rise and join together in the Kaddish. The Kaddish may be found on page 294. Please join me. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו, אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. May the source of peace and comfort bring peace and comfort to us, to all who mourn, and let us together say, Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. It has become our custom at this point in our service to switch from moments of memory to moments of celebration and of achievement. And we have a few of these Shechianu moments right now that we are happy to share with you. We would like to congratulate Toby and Jay Siegel. Mazel tov to Toby and Jay Siegel, who are celebrating their 61st wedding anniversary. 61st wedding anniversary. Now, tomorrow, on March 19th. So, Mazel Tov. What a beautiful moment to celebrate, and we look forward to many more celebrations. How wonderful. Congratulations and Mazel Tov also to James Brown. Jim celebrated his birthday on March 16th, and also his new lease on life on March 16th. How wonderful. Happy birthday to you, Jim. And we look forward to celebrating with you and with your family too for many, many more years to come. And hearty Mazel Tov also, hearty congratulations to Peggy and to Philip Wasserstrom. A big Mazel Tov to the two of you who have celebrated 63 years together and counting on March 15th. Mazel Tov on your March 15th anniversary. Phil and Peggy especially want to thank their temple community at this moment of celebration. Peggy and Phil met at the temple and wish to acknowledge what a huge role it has played in their relationship, in their family, in their lives, and in their happiness together. Peggy and Phil, Mazel Tov, to many, many happy returns. Are there any other Shehechianu moments here? Well, I think this is plenty for us to celebrate. Shall we?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu וקימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Amen. Our service will conclude with Ein Keloheinu, our closing song, before our Kiddush and our Motzi. And now for the Kiddush and the Motzi. If you at home have a glass of wine at the ready, please join us.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הכהן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצוונו בשבת קודשו באהבה וברצון הנחילנו זיכרון למעשה בראשית כי הוא יום תחילה למקרא קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים קיוונו וחטא ויתנו קידשת מכל העמים ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו ברוך אתה אדוני מקדיש השבת אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם המוציא לחם מן הארץ. אמן.
Amen. You can have some place. Adonai oz le'amo iten, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Let us have the strength, the courage, and the will to look at the world around us in all its reality, to think about ways in which we can change the world and change ourselves in the process between Purim and Passover at this season of change and of growth. Shabbat Shalom.